And Councillor Belanger, we're live.
Good morning, everyone. We'd like to bring this meeting to order. I'd like to welcome members of council, both present and participating in Zoom, to staff and to our residents that are watching the meeting. I apologize for the slight delay. I forgot to put my hearing aids in this morning and had to rush home. But with that said, we'll start with disclosure of pecuniary interests, and as of now, I do not have any. But if anyone becomes aware during the meeting, if you could please let the chair know. In community service sections, we have deputations, presentations, petitions, and public meetings. We have 2 this morning, and I will be turning the chair over to Councillor Foster for those.
Thank you, Councillor Belanger. Although Councillor Watson is on the phone with us today, or on the Zoom call, his internet connection may be weak, so I'm going to take over for this as well as the Public Works section. So our first presentation today is from the Ontario Clean Water Agency. Mr. Kashavan from the Ontario Clean Water Agency is in attendance to update committee on the Wasaga Beach Water Pollution Control Plant Roadmap Study for information. And I will welcome you to take the floor, please.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Let me just share my screen. I have some presentation slides for us. Can everyone see the screen okay?
We can.
Excellent. Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to present today to Wasaga Beach's Coordinating Committee. My name is Coco Keshavan. I'm a process optimization engineer with Aqua's Process Optimization and Technical Services Group, also called POTS. I'll be leading the presentation today. Here I have with me John Zhang as well. He's a senior program manager for our group. He'll be assisting me with the presentation and answering any questions as required. Also from Aqua, we have Sangeeta Chopra, Mike Mortimer, and Natalie Baker are just listening in on the presentation. And today we'll be presenting the recently completed Wasaga Beach Roadmap Study and the findings and recommendations from that. So today, this is just the agenda we're going to be going over. First, we'll be going over project background and objective, followed by future population and flow projections. Then we'll be talking about some peak flow reduction considerations by utilizing the equalization tank in Wasaga Beach, because the plant experiences some high peak flows. Then we'll be going over the treatment capacity evaluation for the existing plant. That'll be followed by a roadmap analysis and proposed timelines for the next 30 years. And then we'll be going over an equalization tank analysis just to show the advantages of utilizing this equalization tank for peak flow shaving. And then that'll be followed by a summary and recommendations. So project background and objective. Here we have a simplified process diagram of Wasaga Beach. It's an extended aeration plant, so it consists of the headworks process, aeration for the secondary treatment, and secondary clarifiers, followed by tertiary filtration through sand filters and UV disinfection before being released to the Wasaga River. We also have on the solid side, we have the biosolid system, which has aerobic digestion and sludge storage. So the objective, the background for this project, we looked through each of these individual unit processes and assessed the condition and capacity, and based on that, we created a roadmap for activities that need to be completed or recommended to be completed in the next 30 years. So the boxes you see outlined in red here are ongoing projects at Wasaga Beach. So the goals of these projects to replace any old equipment with new equipment, and also ensuring that the equipment meets the rated capacity and the future needs of the plant. So the objective is to look at the population growth rate of Wasaga Beach and how it would impact the plant, and develop a roadmap that would be triggering activities for the next 30 years. So these are the tasks we followed when conducting this assessment. The first task was a site visit and collecting the background information that's needed. Once we had all the data, we did a plant assessment to assess the existing condition and capacity of all unit processes. And then we developed a roadmap for the next 30 years, for some 2021 to 2050. And then that was summarized in a report. And today I'm giving you a presentation just to highlight the key findings from the study. So future population flow projections. So on this graph here, we have the population growth curve for Wasaga Beach. So based on feedback from the town, we're anticipating a population of about 50,000 people around the year 2051. And based on this trajectory, it's estimated to be about a 2.6% growth rate per year. And based on those population projections, we were able to develop these future flow projections for the plant, as you see in these three curves. The horizontal lines are simply just the thresholds for the design at the plant currently. So the red being the rated capacity of the plant, the purple being the peak flow rated capacity of the plant, and the light blue or teal here you see is the max plant hydraulic flow. The first blue curve we see here is the estimated average day flow for Wasaga Beach wastewater treatment plant up to 2051. This incorporates flow from the Clearview, a township of Clearview, the Stanier area. As I think we're expected to see some flow contributions around 2024. So that's all incorporated in this average day flow. And then the two curves you see above that in orange and green are the peak hourly flow and peak instantaneous flow curves, respectively. And those are developed by reviewing recent flow data, determining the respective peaking factors. So as you can see, Wasaga Beach does have quite a high magnitude of peak flows versus the average day flows when comparing these three curves. And so this slide just talks about the design parameters of the plant and the years the capacity will reach. So the rated capacity of Wasaga Beach is 15,433 meters cubed per day. Based on the population growth rate and flow projection trajectories, we're estimating this capacity to be reached around the year 2040. 80% of that flow will be realized in the year 2034. This is when we want to start the planning process for plant expansion, and followed by design and construction stages. And then 90% of this rated capacity flow is expected to be realized around 2037. So this is typically when we want to see the construction complete or close to being complete. So as you can see, we have a window about 2034 to 2040 for the plant expansion at Wasaga Beach in the future. And the last three rows are the design capacity for 2051. So the rated capacity in 2051 is expected to be just over 20,000. And the peak flows, peak instantaneous and peak hourly flows in 2051 are expected to be about 67 and 58 MLD respectively. So it's important to ensure we're sizing the downstream processes in the plant for these peak flows. Peak flow reduction considerations. Since there's such high peak flows at Wasaga Beach, we've done some consideration to reducing these peak flows and not oversizing downstream equipment. And primarily we'll be doing that through utilization of the flow equalization tank. So there is one existing at Wasaga Beach, is about 2,000 meters cubed. It's currently not being used for flow equalization. However, the purpose of this tank is if there's any peak flows coming into the plant that the downstream unit process can handle, it would divert the flows into this tank, and the flows would be then sent back into the plant during low flow demand periods. So this acts as a peak shaving. So we're involved with there's a few projects going on right now, ongoing, and specifically the headworks and the UV system upgrades. So we're involved with SEMA for the design stages, and during the design, we realized there are space constraints to size these equipments to meet that 2051 peak flow requirement. So because of that, SEMA looked at two options, which was reviewed by Aqua. First option would be to divert flows over 67 MLD to the flow EQ tank. So that's 67 MLD comes from what the estimated peak instantaneous flow would be in 2051. And then Option 2 would be to divert flows over 46 MLD. And 46 MLD was chosen because this is based on SEMA's review during the design stages. This is the max capacity we can put in for the UV system with the available building space, and also the headworks 46 MLD screens are recommended based on space constraints as well. So we looked at these two flow scenarios, and what we did was we looked at the max flow day event in 2021, which was in September, and we projected that into 2051 to simulate how flows would look like in 2051 and how these the existing EQ tank would hold up. So in the first scenario here, we can see, so this is that max flow a day event projected to 2051. The blue lines you see here is how the flow would behave throughout the day. And we have our flow threshold of 67 MLD. Anything above that line is essentially the volume that needs to be stored into the equalization tank. So in this case, it's 833 meters cubed of volume stored. Remember, we have a 2,000 meters cubed tank, equalization tank, so there would be no issues here. However, we would have to incur high costs to have very large screens and UV system, and also some building modifications to account for those. Looking at the 46 MLD scenario, so you can see obviously the threshold is a lot lower, so there's a lot more flow that needs to be diverted. In this scenario, 3,650 meters cubed of volume was stored in the tank, which is greater than the 2,000 we have available. So in this option 2 scenario, we would require an EQ tank expansion. So ultimately, we've decided to go with the utilization of the equalization tank and diverting flows over 46 MLD. The reason being, as I mentioned, the UV system max capacity is 46 MLD. We've discussed with the designer SEMA and also Trojan, the supplier. If we want to go anything beyond this, we would have to create a parallel channel, which would require some trenching, and then we would need to do a building expansion to house that channel. So quite a bit of a cost associated with that. And also SEMA recommended option 2 because the size for the headwork screens, based on the channel depths and the configuration of the headworks, 46 MLD, having 2 screens like that is optimal. And going any bigger would have to do some serious modification of the channel and the building. So we've been approved to go ahead with option 2 for diverting flows over 46 MLD, and our roadmap study is actually based on this direction. So essentially, peak flow shaving allows for reduction of downstream unit treatment processes and leading to significant cost savings. So the idea behind this is to spend some money on the EQ tank, expand that, and utilize that. Spending that money would be cheaper than purchasing a large equipment for the UV and the headworks, and also the significant building modifications that are required. So treatment process capacity evaluation. So here we have a performance potential graph of the existing conditions at Wasaga Beach before any of the upgrades were complete. I'm sure a lot of you have seen these graphs in the past, but what we have here on the y-axis is each unit process, and on the x-axis is the flow in meters cubed per day. And what we've done is we've converted each of the individual unit processes to be equivalent based on average daily flow. So we can compare apples with apples, and we can compare each unit process with the rated capacity of the plant. So the dotted line here we see is the last 3 full years of average day flows. The red line is the rated capacity of the plant, which is about 15,400. And the blue line here we see is what our projected 2051 design flow would be. Rated capacity is just above 20,000. So looking at this, you can see the initial bottlenecks of the process currently are the tertiary sand filters and the aerobic digestion and sludge storage. We're actually doing 2 projects to address these right now. Actually, the sand filter project, both of these 2 sand filters have been replaced and put into new disc filters which has increased the capacity. So now that actually meets the rated capacity here. And we're also doing a biosolids upgrade in 2 phases. The first phase will bring these to meet somewhere around 2031, and the second phase will have to be conducted to meet the rated capacity and the rest of the design. So, and yeah, looking at the rest of the graph, you can see the bar screens we're going to be replacing because the existing ones are old. So that's an ongoing project in design stages. So this will be satisfied. The vortex grit removal, we'll need an additional 1 during pound expansion. The low lift pumps are adequate. However, it's a little short when you look into firm capacity, assuming one of the largest pumps are down. In terms of the aeration system, the hydraulic retention time, we have 4 tanks there. There's no issues. We have the adequate HRT to maintain 15 hours of extended aeration. In terms of oxygen availability, we have 4 blowers there, and they're more than sufficient for the future. However, when we're looking at BOD loading for the 4 tanks, we're slightly less there. The reason being, as per the design basis of the plant, it was designed to treat a BOD concentration of about 150. In the last couple of years, we've been seeing average concentrations of about 190. So because of this, the BOD loading falls a little short. And also the UV system is ongoing, and we're going to be replacing that to meet the future considerations. So based on that, here we have this a bird's eye view of the ongoing projects and proposed projects happening at Wasaga Beach. So everything in purple is ongoing. So we have the headworks, as I mentioned, that's ongoing, the bar screen replacement. And this building here, we have the disc filters that are recently installed, and also the UV system that we're going to be replacing. And then here we have the biosolids upgrade that's going on, where we're converting some of these sludge storage tanks to aerobic digesters and introducing some sludge dewatering. So in the future, we can expect to have an additional sludge storage tank to meet that 180 days requirement. Also, we're looking at expanding this EQ tank and utilizing this to have flow diversion control, so it can be used on a full-time basis. And also for the aeration tank, we likely will need an extra tank during the plant expansion to meet that BOD loading. And also importantly, we have the electrical supply system upgrade. As we put these new technologies in, we need to ensure the feed system is able to handle this electrical demand, and also the standby diesel generator is sized accordingly and has all essential loads tied into it. So roadmap analysis and proposed timelines. So essentially from our report, this is a summary of all the key projects and studies that we're recommending to complete in the next 30 years. The projects highlighted in pink are the ongoing projects, which I've touched on. I'm not going to go into too much detail there. Starting from the left here, one of the projects we recommend is automating the WAS pumps. We should do that as soon as possible. Currently, the pumps are manually wasted. So having that on VFDs and having automatic wasting there would provide better control of the secondary system. And we also have a few studies recommended. I touched on that electrical system capacity study. We want to do a study to see what future generator we need and any electrical system upgrades based on these project trajectories that we see. Also, we recommended a study on the aeration and secondary clarifiers. Just do a tracer study based on our site visits and some data we've collected. We suspect they may be short circuiting, so this is a very small study just to see if we can address any short circuiting concerns. We also have an optional biosolid management optimization study. This is to evaluate different biosolids treatment options. So this will be like a technical analysis, life cycle costs, and comparison of alternatives to converting biosolids to resources. The way the industry is headed is always looking at green technology. So if we can, this is an optional study the town can consider if we want to convert some of that biosolids to resources. We also recommend an odor control study just to do a facility-wide check to make sure that there's no evaluate any feasible options to controlling odor to make sure we're with meeting MECP design guidelines. And the other studies here, other projects here, we have the aeration blower upgrades. I did mention the blowers are sufficient for the plant. However, every 25 years or so, you need to replace blowers. So there's some standby centrifugal blowers that are reaching the end of their life around 2024. So those need to be replaced. Also for the secondary clarifiers, I know we've been doing some recent steel structure refurbishment and being proactive in maintaining our clarifiers, but we also recommend in the next from 2025 to 2030 to inspect those and do any refurbishments or replacements of the concrete structure as needed, 1 per year. And we also have recommending an aeration tank optimization study. This is just a study to see any potential opportunities to re-rate the existing aeration system, and maybe we can apply any new technologies such as MBBR or MABR, just to see if there's any possibility of using the existing tankage we have without expansion to get that secondary treatment process okay for rated capacity and also the future flow. And then I mentioned the phase 2 of the biosolids project that'll happen sometime before 2031. That's when the phase 1 is expected to reach its capacity. And then we have our flow equalization system upgrade study. So around 2030, we'd want to do some sort of hydraulic study, review some flows and see how much we should expand that EQ tank and what automatic flow control is required. But this could, the actual construction of this can be coupled in with the plant expansion, which is planning to be happening around 2034 to 2037. So 2034 to 2035 is when we do that Class C and planning, and 2035 to 2037 is the detailed design, the construction for the plant expansion. So projects to meet the 2051 flow requirements. So that's going to be the plant expansion project. So in 2034 to 2035, we will be doing the Class CA and conceptual design for the plant. So this is kind of the procedure and studies that need to take place. Typically, this would be cost around $200,000 to $350,000 in today's dollars, depending on the overall scope. Once this Class EA and conceptual design is approved, we can start the detailed design shortly after, around 2035, and plan to have construction completed around the end of 2037. So taking all those future projects into consideration, here we have our future performance potential graph. As you can see now, based on this assumes full utilization of the equalization tank and diverting flows over 46 MLD to the equalization tank. You can see now all processes are satisfied. The future upgrades are in pink. These are the ones that need to be addressed during the plant expansion. So we would need an additional grit removal tank. In terms of the aeration system, we may need an additional tank, as I mentioned. However, if we do a study and there's some technology we can use to utilize the existing tankage with that expansion, that can be explored. The disc filters, we need one more disc filter as well. And the UV system, you can see here we have 3 banks for 46 MLD, so that's satisfied. I did put an extra bank just for consideration during the plant expansion, because MECP design guidelines typically like to have an extra bank on standby. So in case one of these banks need to go for maintenance, it can be popped out and the standby one can be put in. So we can do some considerations for that in the future. So now this will be going over the equalization tank versus no equalization tank and the advantages. So here we just have the unit processes are affected by peak flow. That's the headworks, vortex grit removal, low lift pumps, disc filters, and UV disinfection. So here we just have the capacities based on ongoing projects and what's existing there. When we use the EQ tank, we're good for 2051, sometimes beyond, and around 2045. However, if we don't use the EQ tank, you can see we fall short in certain aspects, primarily the headwork screens and the UV system, where we'll have to do significant, add an extra channel here, add an extra channel for both, and actually do some significant building modification. So you can see the advantages of using an EQ tank in terms of timelines. This table here goes through each unit processes and describes the benefits of what happens when you utilize the EQ tank versus not utilizing the EQ tank. However, for time's sake, I won't go through this. It's summarized well in this graph, where we have a magnitude of total cost comparing the EQ tank versus no EQ tank. So everything in blue here is the total cost if you're utilizing the EQ tank. Everything in orange is what we see if we're not utilizing the EQ tank. So you can see if we use the equalization tank, there will be some costs associated with expanding it and allowing it for flow diversion control. However, on the headwork side, we're saving about 100% cost because of an extra channel and an extra unit that's required in some building modifications. In terms of the vortex grit removal, there's no changes there. We're going to be needing a third one for the plant expansion. Low lift is a slight extra cost. If we don't have a tank, we need to convert one of those smaller pumps to a bigger pump to keep up the capacity. Disc filters, there's no change here. We'll need a third one regardless. It's the timings of when you need one is a little bit different. The big one here really is the UV disinfection that I mentioned. By utilizing the EQ tank, we're good for 46 MLD up to 2051. If not, in around 2042, we would need to do a building expansion to build a parallel channel. And this is where so you can see the headworks and the UV disinfection. That's where the higher costs are. I didn't put any specific numbers towards this just because the scope's not really defined at the moment without doing some studies. Also, we've been seeing some price escalations and market volatility. So there is, as of recent, you may all know, like the cost of raw materials have been going up for metals. Seems to have been calmed down, but we're also seeing fuel costs historical highs. Due to all these combinations, the market volatility and inflation combined makes it very difficult to assume project costs at the moment. So in summary, the bottlenecks of the process of the tertiary sand filters, aerobic digester, and sludge storage tanks, the completion of these ongoing projects will allow these key processes to meet the plant rated capacity requirements, except the aerobic digesters, where a second phase of the biosolid project needs to take place. We proposed several studies. These studies will be recommended to be completed within the next 5 years. That'll help enhance plant treatment performance and also provide a good design basis for future plant expansions. Looking into the future, all major unit processes except the low lift pumps and secondary clarifiers have insufficient capacity to treat projected flows to 2051. So a Class E and conceptual design to upgrade the plant should take place around 2034 to 2035 or earlier, depending on the population growth rate, what we see. And the detailed design and construction should be completed around 2035 to 2037. That concludes the presentation. That's pretty much the summary and the highlights of that roadmap study. I just open the floor to any questions or any clarifications you guys may have.
Thank you, Mr. Kashavan. It's hard to make wastewater exciting, and you did a great job. So I will open it to questions from the floor. Councillor Belanger, please.
Yes, thank you very much. I think a lot of us take our water and wastewater somewhat for granted. It's unfortunate that we can't get this kind of information to all of our residents because it's certainly complicated and costly. And thank you for a very detailed presentation. I do have just a couple of questions. The 2034 year as proposed for starting the EA study and then the detailed study after. Is there any merit that given available grant funding, because we never know in any given year what grants become available for us, whether it be for planning or whether it be for construction, that if there was an opportunity earlier, would we be in a position to do those studies earlier with other levels of government supporting that? And then if those studies are done earlier, I'm assuming they probably need to be done to be able to qualify for grant funding for actual construction. So I'm just asking on the flexibility, is the timing critical to what you need to plan, or could the plan be done earlier? Thank you.
So typically these studies are initiated around 80% of the rated capacity. However, there should be some flexibility to do a little bit earlier, given that the studies that we complete we are doing the plant expansion at a reasonable time frame. If we do it a little too early, and we're waiting 5, 6, 7 years, they may not be. We have to redo some aspects of that to consider what's going on at the given time. But I think there will be some flexibility, but typically we do like to do it around the 80% mark. So we know the plants, it's in a close time frame to be expanded. But I guess given whatever grants or funding we have available is something we can take into consideration for sure.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor, please.
Thank you. Just a quick comment. Thank you, Mr. Gishaven, for the report and the summary. It was a very detailed report. It made for lengthy reading, but I think as responsible members of council, we need to fully understand the role that we take on with water and wastewater. It really is crucial for the future of our town, and we need to be prepared for that growth. So seeing that we have 10 or 12 years before we have to be spending big amounts of money is good news for this council. So thank you very much.
All right, seeing nothing else, I'll just add a couple little comments if I could. Early on, you showed a graph showing our population growth, and you said it averages about 2.6% per year. At times, that's an exponential growth, not a linear. So, there 2.6% growth per year recently would be considered a really bad year. So I know you guys take a lot of consideration on that. I just thought I'd remind you. I also, on the EQ flow tank, if I heard you right, we're not utilizing that one that was in the picture right at this moment. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. It's currently at the plant right now. It's typically used for if there's any major shutdowns or maintenance that's done, and we can just stop some flow to the plant. They kind of use that as a storage tank and then divert the flows back in.
Thank you. Okay. My second part to that question then is, if we begin to utilize that at some point in the future, to me, based on that picture, it looks like a big open, well, basically like a septic tank, really, a place to hold stuff for a while. And so my concern then is odor control, because it doesn't look, I mean, if it's just open to the air, it may be a challenge. So you don't need to get into the technical part, but is there a plan to mitigate that? Or would the effluent in there produce odor? I mean, it's not clear.
Yeah. I see what you're saying. Yeah, so since we are dealing with raw sludge, definitely would generate some odors. So during the study for that, we would have to explore options, maybe putting a roof on top. Obviously, there's going to be increased cleaning requirements, spraying down. So yes, there's things that need to be considered, and from the odor standpoint, it could be more frequent cleaning and also having a roof on top of that tank.
Okay, thank you for that. That was my final, and then the last one is probably, if Kevin's in the room, it's been a while since I've had a tour of the plant. Is it possible for perhaps the council to be given another tour of the plant? It's like you said, it's a great facility, and like Councillor Belanger said, we take it for granted, but it certainly never hurts for us to have a little refresher on, as unpleasant as it can be inside there, a refresher on what goes on and how the whole process works. So I'll leave that to staff, perhaps. With that, if there's nothing else, I will thank you again, Mr. Gishaven, for your presentation. Oh, and there's the resolution, but I see our CAO wants to say something. Go ahead, George.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The question has to do with the downstream flows. When I look at the graphs that you provided in the report, it appears that, the peak flows are intermittent, and I suspect that they're probably connected with significant rain events where we're seeing infiltration into the sanitary sewer system, which is resulting in the peak flows at the plant. Do you think there's an opportunity between now and 2034 where we could be doing a review of our sanitary sewer system to identify areas where we may be able to minimize infiltration into the system, thereby reducing peak flows to the plant?
Yeah, that's a very great idea. That's always the best approach, I would say, to try to minimize the impacts of I&I. I believe, when speaking to Kevin, the Wasaga Beach does have a proactive I&I program going on currently, so not too familiar with the details and where that's at the moment, but I would say that's a good approach to try to minimize the I&I to see how that affects peak flows.
Kevin's here to answer that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, through you. We do proactively undertake CCTV inspections for leakage, so there is a program in place that we undertake every year and advance restoration and improvements to those leaks as well. So that is underway and will continue to be underway to help reduce those peaks.
Follow up, George?
Thank you. Just another question. You mentioned about a study dealing with biosolids management and recovery study, and it would seem to me that pretty much every plant in Ontario has the need to store biosolids and identify recovery strategies. Is this a study that could be shared, or sorry, the cost could be shared amongst different plants so that the results, again, could be shared to optimize the biosolids management and recovery?
Oh, you mean like typical cost for those kind of studies, or
Yeah, like the biosolids management and recovery study, you identified that as one of the studies, and it would seem to me that the results of that would be applicable to multiple plants, since everybody has the need for a biosolids management facility. I'm just inquiring about spreading the cost of that particular study across several plants, so that it's not as expensive for Wasaga Beach, because I think the outcomes would be applicable to a number of plants, where the other studies were very, very specific to Wasaga Beach in terms of the optimization of the function of the plant. Thank you.
Right. No, I see what you're saying. I know every, I guess, plant is unique in the way of the biosolids generated, but yeah, if there's a potential to couple that with other plants, share that cost of study. If it's going to be sharing the resources for those biosolids, that's something we could definitely look into.
Thank you.
Okay, now seeing, and yeah, just checking Councillor Watson there. Not seeing anything else. Again, I'll thank you for your report, and I'll read the resolution. Ask for a mover and seconder. Resolve that the coordinated committee hereby receives the information from Mr. Kashavin from Ontario Clean Water Agency with respect to the Wasaga Beach Water Pollution Control Plan Roadmap Study for information. Mover, please. Councillor Belanger, seconder. Deputy Mayor. All those in favor, please. That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much, and we'll get our second presentation in just 1 second.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
All right. With that, we're going to move on to the second presentation. This is Mr. Twigger from Tatham Engineering, and he's in attendance to update committee on the Drainage Master Plan Study West End Study Report for information. I'll turn the floor over to you, sir.
There we go. Good morning. Thank you. Again, my name is Daniel Twigger. I am the Manager of Water Resource Engineering at Tatham Engineering, and I'm here to discuss the ongoing flooding issues and drainage deficiencies in the west end of Wasaga Beach. So I think we're all aware that there's been some historic flooding issues in the west end of the town, and during the October 26, 2001 council meeting, these issues were brought to council's attention. There was a deputation and a petition presented that identified and presented the flooding issues along Maryland Avenue, George Avenue, Beechwood Road, and Roberts Street. In the petition, it was identified that there was 4 occasions of flooding over a 21-month period between January 2020 and September 2021, and 46 of the local residents signed the petition requesting that council assist with the resolution of the drainage deficiencies in the area, as well as the flooding that has been ongoing for some time. In response to this, the town retained Tatham Engineering, who, we're currently completing the ongoing master drainage plan for the town. So the town retained us to further assess the existing drainage issues in this area, identify the extensive flooding that are occurring, and develop solutions to address these deficiencies. Following an approach recommended by the Wasaga Valley Conservation Authority, we developed models that predicted flooding consistent with the photos and the reports presented by the public, as well as flooding that Tatham staff and town staff have witnessed on site in the past few years. Essentially, Beechwood Road forms a barrier or an obstruction, a dam for lack of a better word, that restricts flows. Beechwood Road is higher than the lands to the south. The centerline profile grade is higher than the grades on private property, as well as Robert Street, Maryland Avenue, and George Avenue. And the culverts that cross Beechwood do not have sufficient capacity to convey all flows downstream. So during spring freshet and major storm events, water essentially backs up or builds up behind Beechwood Road, uses the existing ditches, and it spreads out and floods the low-lying areas along these streets and along the properties south of Beechwood. Unfortunately, the conveyance systems downstream of Beechwood also have limiting capacity, and we see flooding along Constance Boulevard and private properties between Constance Boulevard and Georgian Bay. So as part of our analysis, we evaluated a number of options, a series of options to try to come up with the best solution to identify or to rectify the drainage issues and the flooding that is ongoing in this area. And not only that, but in consideration of a number of ongoing studies in the area, including the West End Depot project, the Shore Lane Drainage Improvement Project, as well as the Constance Boulevard Drainage Improvements Environmental Assessment. And through this assessment and evaluation, we developed a series of recommended or preferred solutions and prioritized them in a list or in an order for them to be implemented. And they're going to be presented on the series of maps I'll present next. So our phase one is to improve the system along Maryland Avenue South. Maryland Avenue South does not have a proper drainage outlet at this point. Water tries to drain both east and west through the roadside ditch on the south side of Beechwood Road, but the ditch is fairly low sloped and undulating and doesn't have the positive grade to the nearest outlet. So to try to improve the drainage in this area, we're recommending that an outlet be constructed under Beechwood Road to the downstream conveyance system along Maryland Avenue South. There are a number of options we evaluated, and because Beechwood Road is an MTO owned and operated road, there's a number of considerations we have to take into account, and including their design criteria, their requirements for flooding, and operation and maintenance. As our current recommended solution is to install the MTO minimum size culvert under Beechwood Road. That is actually, it's oversized for the area. It's oversized. It will convey more flow than is required, but it is the MTO minimum size. However, we did explore other options at reduced sizes, which, depending on the option we choose, will impact the cost and amount of work that we have to do along Maryland Avenue North downstream of Beechwood. This other option included installing a smaller cross culvert, a 300 millimeter diameter culverts on either side of the road, which would essentially convey the flow and reduce flooding in this area. Regardless of the outlet options, we're still recommending improvements to improve the ditches and roadside driveway culverts and roadside ditches to improve drainage conditions, provide positive fall, and reduce the flooding in this area. So still as part of phase one works, because we'd recommend that you start from the downstream end when you're doing drainage improvements and work your way upstream to make sure that any downstream drainage systems have the capacity to convey flow from upstream improvements. If we proceed with the minimum size MTO culvert, which is a 600 millimeter diameter culvert, the downstream roadside ditches and driveway culverts and the outlet to Georgian Bay would not have sufficient capacity to convey the flows that the 600 culvert conveys. They're all smaller size culverts. So improvements along Maryland Avenue North would be required so that we don't transfer a flooding problem on the south side of Beechwood Road to the north side. However, if we do proceed with, and if the MTO is in favor of putting in a smaller culverts, the 300 millimeter diameter culverts that we've also evaluated, then the downstream system would have sufficient capacity and we wouldn't have to do the improvements along Maryland Avenue North. The other item to keep in mind when we speak of Maryland Avenue is there are high groundwater levels in the area. And if we have to put in a 600 millimeter diameter culvert, we may actually lower the ditch to an elevation that intercepts the groundwater, and we may have groundwater seepage that continually flows through this system. And if that is encountered, we'd recommend that we would change that 600 millimeter diameter culvert to a 600 millimeter diameter storm sewer to eliminate that groundwater seepage into the system. So all three of those options, the 600 millimeter MTO minimum size culvert, the twin 300 millimeter diameter culverts, or the storm sewer, all have varying costs, which I'll, pros and cons, which I will get to later when we talk about the cost estimates. So Maryland Avenue South and North would be what we would recommend as being phase 1 of the works. Phase 2 would be looking at improving the crossing culvert, the Beechwood Road crossing culvert that drains downstream to Bayswater Drive, and improving the Bayswater Drive drainage system to Georgian Bay. Right now that system is working fairly well, but as we increase the capacity of the culvert under Beechwood Drive, it would then be undersized and we would have to make improvements. The other challenge with this area is the roadside ditch is at fairly, or the side slopes of the roadside ditch are at fairly steep slopes, and there's a narrow road allowance. The width of the road allowance is I believe 17 meters, so there's not a lot of room to install, deepen a ditch, widen a ditch, and increase the capacity of the system. So in this area we'd be recommending a portion of it would be enclosed in a storm sewer, so that we can eliminate those grading, the steep slopes of the ditch, and still allow us to have the conveyance capacity to convey the upstream flows. The other improvements would just be to clean out the outlet and clean out the outlet culverts. They generally have capacity, they've just silted in and have some debris and material in them that can be cleaned out. So that would be phase 2 of the works. Phase 3 is then upstream of Bayswater on Robert Street, and again, once the outlet is improved across Beechwood Road, we'd be looking at making some roadside ditch and culvert improvements to convey the flow from Robert Street to Beechwood Road and to the new outlet. Now, there are a number of locations along Robert Street where local residents have, as part of their lot grading, have created channels that pull water from the water course. That is shown at the bottom of this page. I guess the water course isn't shown, but it's located along the bottom of this page, and it pulls water to the roadside ditch. So this is an area where we're seeing a significant quantity of flow that enters the municipal drainage system and makes its way towards Beechwood. So improving the ditch through this area will increase its capacity and eliminate, or sorry, I shouldn't say eliminate, but certainly reduce the amount of flooding that is, both the frequency and extent of flooding that occurs in this area. Then phase 4 of the recommended solutions sort of goes hand in hand with the Constant Boulevard outlet EA that is ongoing. There is currently improvements recommended at the downstream end of Constance Boulevard. That EA I don't believe is final, but there's considerations for improving or installing a new drainage outlet through private property to Georgian Bay. We certainly recommend that as an option, or as a solution to improve or increase the conveyance capacity of the drainage systems in this area, and we've included it as part of our recommended solution. And then recognizing we have a new outlet, we're able to increase or send more flow through the Thomas Street drainage system by increasing the culvert crossing on Beechwood Road and the culvert crossings and roadside ditch between Beechwood Road and Constance Boulevard. Then phase 5 of the works is to improve both George Avenue, just the roadside ditches and culverts along this system to reduce some of the local drainage issues in the area, but more importantly to improve the drainage system along Beechwood Road by improving the ditch grades and cross section as well as the culvert crossings. This will help equalize the flow as it hits Beechwood Road. I mentioned that it forms an obstruction and water backs up behind the road. This will help the water spread out and equalize and use each of the new outlets that are being installed so that we convey the flow and reduce flooding in the area upstream of Beechwood. Now, as part of our assessment, we went ahead and we updated our analysis to include the proposed solutions so we could identify the improvements that they're making and the reduction in flooding. It's a little hard to see on this map, I apologize, but the dark blue areas, if you consider the dark blue plus the light blue areas as one, that would be what the existing flooding conditions are during a 1 in 10 year return frequency design storm. So, and the light blue then represents just the proposed flooding, and you will see that there is still flooding on some private property and some low-lying areas. These are lot grading deficiencies where the areas are low. But through the municipal drainage system, the water is then contained in the roadside ditch and the culverts and conveyed through this area directly to George and Bay. So although we're not eliminating all flooding, some areas we can't because they are rear lot drainage issues where the rear lots are lower than the road grade and the municipal drainage systems. They're really lot grading deficiencies. But for the most part, water that gets into the municipal system is then collected and conveyed by the roadside ditches and culverts without flooding private property and conveying it to George and Bay. So there is a significant improvement, specifically along Robert Street, Maryland Avenue, and George Street, and in the areas downstream. We did a similar analysis just so we could look at sort of the once-in-a-lifetime storm or a 1 in 100 year return frequency design storm, and we're seeing very similar results where flooding isn't entirely eliminated, but there are significant improvements, and that flooding is generally restricted to low-lying areas and rear yards or areas with grading deficiencies. And as part of our work, we also estimated probable construction costs for each phase. For Maryland Avenue, if we proceed with the MTO recommended or minimum size culvert, the 600 diameter culvert, we would then have to improve the downstream systems, and that project or phase 1 of construction would have an estimated cost of just over $600,000. On Bayswater, to include the storm sewer, add a new outlet, and clean up the downstream end would have a cost of roughly $935,000. The ditching and culvert improvements on Robert Street would have a cost of roughly $345,000. Thomas Street would have a price tag of $750,000. And George Avenue, and the drainage improvements on George Avenue and Beechwood Road would have a cost of roughly $360,000, bringing the total to just under $3 million. Now, I did mention that there is some still discussions ongoing with the MTO about what they will accept as some of the culvert crossings. And on Maryland Avenue, if we're able to, if the MTO will accept a substandard crossing and allow for the 300 millimeter diameter culverts, there would be a cost savings of roughly $300,000 as we don't have to improve all the downstream system north of Beechwood Road. Unfortunately, if they don't agree to it and we find that we encounter high groundwater conditions, to replace that 600 millimeter diameter culvert and replace it with a storm sewer would add $300 or $30,000 to the overall costs. So at this point, we have prepared the recommended solution and presented that to the town. And that concludes my presentation. Is there any questions?
All right, thank you very much for your presentation. I will open it up right now to comments from the table. Councillor Blanchet, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Foster. Just a couple questions. One, in Phase 2 for Baywater Drive, you indicated either a portion storm sewers or clean out. And I'm not, you're the expert, but if you put in a storm sewer, then future clean out wouldn't be required, I'm assuming. If you did a clean out, then that has to be done on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, and sorry, what I meant was, I would suggest that half of the road between, half of Bayswater between Beechwood and Constance would be storm sewer. The other half of the road would remain roadside ditch. And the clean out I was referring to is the outlet itself between Constance Boulevard and George and Bay right now has some sediment buildup. The culverts have some debris inside them. And the culverts are adequately sized. They don't necessarily need to be replaced. They just need to be flushed and cleaned out, and that area cleaned out. You're absolutely right. Ongoing maintenance will be required in the open ditches and at the outlet to maintain that and keep the sediment removed. There will still be some maintenance required in the storm sewer to clean out sumps, but it's generally less than you would require in a roadside ditch or the outlet, the open channels.
I'm just, maybe Kevin would know the cost of the clean out. Like you invest more up front for a storm sewer, but you save down the road. So I don't need to know that right now, but that's something we could look at. The other question on Phase 4 at Thomas Street and Constant Boulevard, where we're suggesting the outlet drainage is going through private property. Is that the TC Energy? I believe it's TC Energy. I'm not know if I've got those letters right. But is that their property?
I don't believe that's their property. I believe the TC Energy property is the outlet for the water, the depot, correct? So it is, it's next to that property, but it's not the energy property.
Okay, thank you. I just thought it might be a little easier
Yeah.
to negotiate with them than.
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor?
Just a quick follow-up to the storm water sewer versus open ditch. I know Bayswater has very deep ditches, so just from a safety perspective, I think the stormwater could be worth considering because it's a fairly narrow road and it's got very deep ditches if you've ever been down that road in the winter. And there's a bit of a turn, and anyway, it might be worth considering. And
that was part of the consideration when we recommended the storm sewer on the upstream side. And I apologize, I forget the road in between Beechwood and Constance. On the downstream side, it does get a little wider and the slopes are less steep. So, and we don't have to do as many improvements there. So it's not as much of a safety issue as it is on the upstream side. And the safety was certainly a consideration when we recommended the storm sewer.
Thank you. If there's nothing else, I have a couple little comments. One, I'm assuming that, this kind of project could be grant fundable. It certainly would be applying for any money we could get to go to it. And I know engineering is engineering, but it's a little, when I look at the aftershot and they're still showing restrictions on water flow at the upstream, it's disappointing because it's not, although it's improving the situation, it's not eliminating it, and that's going to be a problem for people who are living there. But I mean, you can't really make water flow uphill. I've heard anyway. And then as to the open ditch versus storm drain, I think the difference was $30,000 on the, kind of that part of it. And I said, on a $3 million project, $30,000 is chump change. It's not to me, but, if it can lead to a more efficient and safer approach, I certainly would be in favor of that. And again, I can't imagine, or I'm actually in favor of oversizing as much as possible, because to try and move as much water as possible for the residents, and it just improves the overall area. So those are my comments. There's nothing else. I will thank you. 2 engineers in a row today. Big day. I'll read the resolution if I can. Which is here. Resolved that Public Works section of Coordinated Committee hereby receive the enclosed Drainage Master Plan Study West End Study Report for information, and further that the presentation regarding this subject provided by Tatham Engineering Limited at the August 11th, 2022 Coordinated Committee meeting is hereby received. It's moved by Councillor Belanger. It's seconded by Councillor Watson. And all those in favor, please. That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. With that, I'll turn the chair back over to Councillor Belanger.
Thank you, Councillor Foster. We now move to unfinished business, and I see we have none. Other agency reports. We have the Fire Department monthly report. I see the chief is not here. Does anyone have any comments or questions on the Fire monthly report? Okay, so I'll read the motion. Resolved that the Community Service Section of Coordinated Committee receive the July 2022 Fire Department report for information. Could I have a mover? Councillor Wells, and a seconder? Mayor, thank you. All those in favor? That's carried unanimously. I'll now move to the consent agenda, and I'm told there's no items pulled today, so resolved that the Community Service Section of Coordinated Committee hereby receive the August 11th, 2022 consent agenda items 3.4 through to 3.6, and that all the recommendations contained therein be adopted, excluding agenda items pulled from the motion and voted on separately, which they are none. Could I have a mover? Councillor Foster, and the seconder was Councillor Wells. All those in favor? That's carried unanimously. And okay, those were all carried. So I now turn it over to the Chair of Public Works. Oh, that's David Foster today.
Thank you, and with council's indulgence, we'll continue through Public Works because there's doesn't look like there's anything pulled at this point. So we've had our deputations presentations already. Unfinished business. There's a couple items that were recently discussed that will be moving forward. There's no other agency reports. Under the consent agenda, I see nothing pulled at this time. I'll look around. Seeing no changes to that, I'll read the consent agenda. Resolved that the Public Works section of Coordinated Committee hereby receives the August 11th, 2022 consent agenda items 4.4 to 4.6, and that all recommendations contained therein be adopted, excluding item pulled for the motion and voted on separately. And as I mentioned, there are none of those. Mover and seconder, please. Councillor or Deputy Mayor Bray and her worship, all those in favor. That's everybody. It's unanimous. So I will now turn the chair over to me for Development Service. Do we need a break here? Okay. We're going to take we'll be back at 10:15 if we could, please. Thank you very much. All right, thank you. Welcome back. We'll go into the Development Services section of the Coordinated Committee. There are no deputations, presentations, and public meetings today. Unfinished business. There's a few items that are being addressed. Oh, can't put anything over the microphone or it starts to cut out. Okay, other agency reports. There are none. Consent agenda. There's, as far as I know, there's only one item pulled, which is 5.5.1. Seeing nothing else, I'll read the resolution for the consent agenda. Resolve that Development Services section of Coordinated Committee hereby receives the August 11th, 2022 consent agenda items 5.4 through to 5.6, and that all recommendations contained therein be adopted, excluding the agenda items pulled from the motion and voted on separately. And as I mentioned, that's 5.5.1. I'll look for a mover and seconder, please. I see Councillor Watson and Councillor Wells. All those in favor, please. And that's carried unanimously. Item 5.5.1 was pulled. Councillor Boulanger, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair Foster. Yes, I pulled 5.5.1, which is 21 Poplar Glen Road, which is part of the downtown master plan. And if council recalls, in the original official plan policy, we had very prescriptive language, and we have modified that to be more flexible. And my concern is that the individual or the developer that brings forward the plan has a pre-consultation with planning. They're told the preferred policy of 3 stories and parking at the back. And yet, after 2 submissions, we still have 2 stories with parking at the front. And my concern about that is the reason we originally had prescriptive language is so that we had consistency and continuity of the build in that area. And if we go through this process every time, we're putting more workload onto planning, we're taking up more of council time, and potentially we're going to end up with a build-out that is far from being consistent with continuity. So I want some clarification. If in a pre-consultation we make it clear the preferred policy, and I guess after one submission had provided some additional information, and yet here we are accepting for information or looking at something that is not the preferred build. So,
Thank you for that. Would someone from staff like to address that now or take it under consideration and get back to the councillor? Mr. Herron.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's probably worthwhile to provide a response right now to council and to the public at large. The principle of the downtown node and the policies in that downtown node is that intensification should occur in those nodes. So Councillor Boulanger's comment about the official plan requiring 3 stories and parking at the back is absolutely correct, and that's the intent. Where staff stand currently with the applicant is we are actually working with the applicant to bring it to a 3-story standard, to bring it into compliance with the official plan. The difficulty, for everybody's consideration, is that fitting such a building on a smaller site is difficult. So likely there would be some adjustment to the zoning bylaw to make it fit. And I think that we also are going to have to consider new methodologies for engineering. So currently most of our engineering is surface drainage through landscaping, but in that downtown node, if you picture it, it's more of an urban area where it's almost completely hard surfaced, as you would see in other downtowns. So we need to rethink how we do the drainage on that. So those are the discussions we're having with the applicant. And the planner assigned to the file, Samantha, has actually yesterday reached out to the applicant to set up a meeting with them, I believe next week or the week after, to actually discuss these matters. So the intent of the official plan is the goal is to maintain those policies.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor?
Thank you. Yes, the goal is to maintain those official policies, but I also noticed this is an infill lot, and the homes in the neighborhood are typically one-story, single drive, residential homes. So to suddenly put a three-story multiplex in the middle of it could cause difficulties with the neighborhood. So I think if we convert what was a formerly residential neighborhood to downtown, this is off the main street. It's it's not even visible from Main Street. I think we have to be very careful and respect the neighborhood, not just the planning policies.
Thank you, and I think staff said they're taking it all under consideration and working with the developer, so we'll hear back. Yes, go ahead.
There's actually, it's an excellent point, Mr. Chairman, and the urban design guidelines and the official plan do have criteria that speak to fit to the neighborhood. And if we look at it in the long term, all of these lots would eventually be developed with higher density, understanding that there is a trickle down, so as you get deeper into the neighborhood, that higher density is not a requirement. But for this lot, and the lots that are on the same side of the street, over time, the expectation would be that they would all be redeveloped as higher density. But in the interim, for this building, it would be a matter of, there are criteria which adjust for fit, and sometimes it's shaving the building a little bit or adjusting the type of windows so that there's maintenance of privacy on the neighbors from look down. So there are design techniques that will be considered in this application.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. All right, seeing nothing else then, I will read the resolution that Development Services Section of Coordinated Committee receives the information report for site plan application P0521 for 21 Poplar Glen Road for information. I'll look for a mover, please. Councillor Watson, I see that, and Councillor Belanger. All those in favor, please. That's carried unanimously. I will now that concludes the Development Services section. I'll turn the chair over to the Deputy Mayor, please.
Thank you, Councillor Foster. So we now enter the General Government Services section of Coordinated Committee. Today we have no deputations, presentations, petitions, or public meetings. There's nothing under unfinished business, no other agency reports, and we have a consent agenda. So, and that consent agenda reads, resolved that General Government Section of Coordinated Committee hereby receives the August 11th, 2022 consent agenda items 6.4 through to 6.6 and the recommendations contained therein be adopted except for agenda items that are pulled from the motion, which will be voted on separately. And at this point, I see 6.5.6 has been pulled. 6.5.5 I think was just, I'm not sure, I have a star that it was pulled, but I don't have a motion. Joe, did you?
I had a comment for 6.5.1 and I pulled 6.5.5 and 6.5.
Okay, so 6.5.5 and 6.5.6 have been pulled. If you wanted to go ahead with your comments on 6.5.1, Councillor Belanger?
Yes, I just wanted to comment on the Municipal Law Enforcement Property Standards Report, that in June, the calls for service were 904, up 53%. And I just think it's something to keep an eye on. You know, we've talked about property standards a bit, and now I know they probably take on some summer support, but they also have vacation through that period. So just that we look at it, and if staff believes that that needs to if that's a continued trend and we need to invest a little more, if they could bring that forward to council. Thank you.
Okay, seeing no more comments, I've read the motion. If I could get a mover and a seconder, please, for the consent agenda. Councillor Foster, Mayor Byfolchi, all in favor? And that motion carries 6-0 unanimously. So then the first item pulled is item 6.5.5, Director of Building and Development Services report regarding climate change action plan charting our path forward. Councillor Belanger, you wish to speak to this?
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor Bray. After reviewing the whole report, I just want to make it clear, because I have a notice of motion on the table coming up later. But we have covered some significant work that the town is doing related to climate change and the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, especially in the area of the arena and library, where we're exceeding government legislation. And I don't think anyone is suggesting that we are not working to improve in these areas. And we celebrate that, because it's certainly important, and you can't turn on the news today anytime without having a segment on climate change. It's affecting North America in a very big way, and it deserves to be a priority. The fact is that a standing committee costs nothing and formalizes our commitment to do more, with passionate volunteers assisting council.
Point of order, please. This is dealing with the climate change perspectives, not the motion you have
No, I
about bringing in a...
understand that, but it's related in the report. I'm going to say it now or later, so it's...
Well, it seems to me later would be appropriate when it's with the actual resolution about the... That's my view.
Well, does anyone...
Yeah, so my ruling is, does your comments relate to this report?
Well,
It sounds like you're talking to your notice of motion, which is 2 items down on the agenda.
Well, I would tell you that there was an error on the original agenda where my motion was, it's been corrected, but it was second.
It's
so
been
I had
corrected,
prepared
Councillor
this.
Belanger.
I'm okay to leave this till later.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair Foster, or Councillor Foster. Any other comments, Councillor Belanger?
No?
So I just had one. I thought it was an excellent report. Thank you to our Chief Building Inspector. One of the recommendations in there was that we did some research, and I just wonder, having access to our platform where we can actually reach out and ask our residents how they feel about different issues, how we can move that recommendation forward, because I thought it was a really good one to actually use the platform to ask residents what really is important to them. My experience with market research in the past is that quite often people say that they want A, B, and C, but when you start to put dollar values to it, suddenly their priorities shift a little. And I think it would be good to kind of get the temperature of this issue out in the general public. So if that feedback could go back to, thank you. So I will read the motion that the General Government Services section of Coordinated Committee receive the Director of Building and Development Services Chief Building Officials Report entitled Climate Action Change Plan, Charting Our Path Forward. If I could have a mover, Councillor Foster, seconder, Mayor Byfolchi, all in favor? And that motion carries unanimously. Thank you. The next item is item 6.5.6, Manager of Human Resources Report, dated August 11 through the Ministry of Labor, Training and Skills Development, Occupational Health and Safety Orders. And this was pulled by Councillor Belanger.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Bray. Yes, in this report, it seems to me to downplay the serious nature of the Ministry of Labor orders. I would like to see the actual orders posted to the town's website so they can the public can see the full details of this report. The annual required reviews have not been conducted as per policy. Policies indicated by the Ministry of Labor require enhancement, and the ongoing required staff training has not been happening as required. Ultimately, this is the responsibility of our CAO and the head of health and safety. The report cites that reviews happened, but were not documented. I want to point out, I think that related to updates, the Ministry of Labor indicated that the last updates were 2010 and 2013, and the last reviews that I could determine were in 2016. So if reviews were done by the Health and Safety Committee and members of staff, I would like that council be presented the minutes of those committee meetings so that we can verify that the claim in this report is indeed accurate. When I motioned to implement a robust whistleblower policy related to our workforce harassment and violence in the workplace policy, I mentioned that Collingwood had indicated that they felt if they would have had a robust whistleblower policy, they could have avoided the inquiry. At that time, our mayor indicated that she felt we were much better than Collingwood. I would suggest that the Ministry of Labor's report disputes that. The Ministry of Labor report further reinforces the need for a robust whistleblower policy, and I hope that when staff bring that back to council, that they maybe look at the original recommendations in my motion. Beyond that, as to the mention of the CTV news story in this report and the fact that it wasn't factual, or portions were not factual, firstly, I want to make it known that I would welcome, in fact, I would invite legal litigation and discovery related to my comments on the CTV Barrie news story. I am speaking to this report today responding to the outrageous rants the mayor has made on social media, calling me a liar on 2 occasions, and I quote, "His claims made on CTV were not truthful. The report was riddled with lies from those that contributed to the story, and also her request for me to speak to information withheld from council, which I will do a portion of now, and I am not identifying any individuals. I was given the opportunity to review a document explaining the handling of the sexual harassment investigation and expressing concern as to how a member of council has been treating a staff member involved and criticizing their performance since the investigation. The memo indicates that relationships and rumors involving the fire department, town staff, and members of council was one of the reasons it was determined that an external investigation was warranted to ensure the best interests of the municipality be protected. Further, the memo indicated the investigation was thorough.
Councillor Belanger, is the memo you are referring to confidential?
Not to my knowledge. Further to the memo indicated the investigation was thorough and included the review of very
Councillor Foster?
high volume of
Excuse me, Councillor
inappropriate
Belanger?
images found.
Point of order.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Ms.
Okay, I just want to read one thing on here. So-
Point of order.
No, no,
Councillor
no, no, this
Belanger,
is-
point of
Go
order.
ahead. Go ahead.
My concern is that memo was, my microphone's not, oh, there it is working. My concern is that memo was an in-camera item. So whether someone's mentioned or not, the context of that was discussed in camera, and it's a human resource issue, and it should not be discussed out here. I'm happy to go in camera and listen to the rest. I'd love to hear it. But I just do not believe that we're in a, replying to something on the ministry orders, as Ministry of Labor Health orders, going in to discuss an in-camera item without naming names, but being very specific as to what's going on. That was in camera. So that's my point of order on it. I let the chair rule.
I absolutely rule in favor. I have no idea what memo you are referring to. If it wasn't in camera one, then we should be discussing this in camera.
Just in response, first I will tell you this was never discussed in camera. Secondly, I just want to say to Chair Bifulci, you have publicly...
Councillor Belanger, a confidential memo is not public record. You cannot read it into a
I-
council meeting and
I
claim
have no knowledge
that
of
it
this being
is.
confidential, but I'm not reading
said
from the
it
memo
was.
now. I'm making a statement. Chair by Fulci, you have publicly called me a liar. Both yourself and the CAO requested me personally to provide information I feel was withheld by council and why I believe there was a cover-up. You both indicated you have nothing to hide, so please stop interrupting me. But the point is, I will not go in camera with this. The mayor has done this once before, but I will not.
Excuse me,
because
Councillor Belanger, there's a standard
I
of
do not
conduct
want
at
to
this
be in a
table, and
position
shouting
that I
over
cannot
the
talk
chair is
about it
not
in public.
acceptable.
I will not discuss this in camera.
Then we don't need to discuss it if it's confidential. This motion refers to the Ministry of Labor orders. You are going off on whatever it is you feel like making a statement about. That doesn't make it right. There are rules of procedure. I know you have breached them in the past. I don't want you to do it again.
I'm just going to respond that in the report is the fact that the CTV newscast and that it contained false information. This is absolutely related to the report in front of us.
In your opinion.
Well, you can read it yourself. I have it here.
As do we all, as does the public. Thank you, Councillor Belanger. Olchi, did you wish to speak next?
Thank you. Just to say, Councillor Belanger made a comment that I had said something about Wasaga Beach being much better than Collingwood or something along those lines. Without going back to that meeting to understand the context of it, I would ask that nobody take that as gospel. I would also say your comments on CTV left it in the air as to what was withheld. I have asked twice. I know the CAO has asked you. You have had ample opportunity to speak to us about what you feel was withheld. Council members do not have access to an entire file dealing with a staffing matter. You appear to have something that the rest of us do not, and I would suggest if you have concerns about that, we are happy to sit down with you. But this constant saying that we have withheld something is not true. I have no idea what you are speaking about. So again, the offer goes out to sit down with you, Councillor, if you think that you have something that is valid. Thank you.
Just to the mayor's response, any more detailed information that I have will be provided directly to the Ministry of Labor investigator. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. CAO. I saw your hand.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor, and I just want to repeat what the mayor has indicated, that I extended an invitation to Councillor Belanger to outline to me what he thought information was withheld. I have not heard back from Councillor Belanger. I have gone through all the materials that I presented to Council, both with respect to investigation and whatnot, and I cannot determine what he feels that I may have withheld. But I've left it with him, and I await his response. Madam Deputy Mayor, I just wanted to update Council on a further Ministry of Labour report. Denise and I, our manager of Human Resources, met with the Ministry of Labour on Tuesday together for a brief period, and then I met with the Ministry of Labour inspector on my own for a period of time, and late yesterday he issued his field visit report, and if with your permission, Madam Deputy Mayor, I'd just like to read you what the report says.
Yes, please, go ahead.
So it is the visit purpose was to follow up on an harassment complaint, and the detailed narrative is as follows. This workplace was visited on August 9th, 2022 to follow up on a reported concern regarding workplace harassment. The Ministry of Labour Immigration Training and Skills Development Inspector will not comment on or judge the behavior of any individual or individuals. The inspector will not comment on whether the allegation is founded and will not perform an investigation into the allegations. Under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, the employer has a legal obligation to investigate reports of alleged harassment and to report in writing the findings of the investigation to applicable parties, complainant and alleged harasser, and any corrective actions taken if necessary. A review of the issued orders was conducted during a discussion regarding the control of an investigator's findings and outcomes. No further orders issued at this time. So the town, the Human Resources Department, the administration fulfilled its obligations with respect to conducting an investigation, reporting the findings of the investigation to the applicable parties, and dealt with corrective action as necessary. Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor.
Thank you very much for providing clarity. I know when I had originally seen the Ministry of Labor orders, I had questions about the process, about the timing, about the kind of the flow of paperwork. Many of us heard about ministry orders through CTV at 6 o'clock on a Friday evening before the town even had notice. My experience with the Ministry of Labor is that's typically not how they do business. I know the CAO has looked into the process to make sure that proper process and fairness was given to the town of Wasaga Beach. So I thank you for your update today. And I think it should reassure all those that are watching that the town is doing what the town needs to do to protect itself and its employees. Mr. CAO?
Thank you. If I may make just two more comments. What I've read to you today is a field visit report. It will be posted on all the town's occupational health and safety bulletin boards. I believe it's already been posted. And yes, Madam Deputy Mayor, the town did follow the proper process in dealing with the complaint. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Seeing no further comments, I will. I don't know. I apologize if that noise went through to everybody. Resolved that the General Government Services section of Coordinated Committee receive information pertaining to MOLSTSD orders issued to the town. If I could have a mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Wells, Councillor Foster, all in favor? Opposed, if any? And that motion carries 5-1 with Councillor Belanger in opposition. Moving down the agenda, there's a slight shift to the order, and item 6.7.2, a notice of motion from Councillor Belanger, Climate Change Advisory Committee request, will now be put on the floor. If there's any, would wish to speak to your motion?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Bray. I won't repeat the first section about celebrating and the work we've done, but the fact that a standing committee costs nothing and formalizes our commitment to do more with passionate volunteers assisting. Budget allocation mentioned in my motion for the creation of a climate action plan is also not necessarily a significant cost. We have seen many grant...
Councillor Belanger, I apologize. I needed to get a mover and a seconder to get this motion on the floor. I assume you'll be moving it. Is there a seconder for item 6.7.2?
I'm willing to second it, to put it on the floor.
Awesome, Councillor Foster. Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Belanger.
Oh, sorry, I thought you had told me to go ahead. So the budget allocation to create a climate action team is, or an action plan, is not necessarily a significant cost. We have seen many grant opportunities to assist in the developing of these plans, I think ongoing and in other municipalities. There's also significant grants that could be available for upgrading town facilities. A renewed commitment is appropriate and required. There's an operational return on investment. It has been proven and follows with the added benefit of reduced greenhouse gas emissions. And to get started right away would give us a head start versus waiting to a new council. I think there was a suggestion of starting with terms of reference But my understanding is the committee has to be approved prior to that commencing, I believe are the rules. So I support my motion. I believe there's a lot of environmentalists in our community that support it. I believe we are, in the data we've looked at, behind in a number of areas compared to other municipalities, and this is an opportunity to get going, and the next council could very likely appoint many of the same people to the committee. Thank you.
Councillor Foster?
Thank you. I wanted to move that to get it on the floor. I do have some modifications that would be required for me to support it in the long run. First, I'll just do a mechanical one. It should be relatively easy. The final one, second last paragraph says, then I motion that a climate change advisory committee, and goes on. First, council is not an individual, so it should be it moved that a climate change advisory committee to council, because this isn't an individual item. I know people want to have that for election purposes or to be the hero of the environment, but unless that gets changed, I will not, because it should read, be it resolved that the Council of Wasaga Beach establish a climate advisory committee as soon as possible. Oh, sorry, that's, and this is also modifying, to assist staff and council in the development of a climate action plan. And again, the reason I wanted to modify that last one is, as you kind of pointed out, the top priority to assist the council. Well, that's terms of reference items, so that has to be established by the when they found the committee. So that's what that modifying. And then the other part is further that appropriate amount be allocated in the 2023 budget. This council can't allocate for future ones. So it would be further that Treasury staff had a budget item for this committee to be considered by subsequent council. Those two modifications I think are mechanical and shouldn't be a real huge deal. There was a comment you made about environmentalists that would support it. I'm sure there are environmentalists that wouldn't. So I do have a problem with some issue, minor concerns here I want to bring up for discussion. And whereas they've done they've done the study of local municipalities, this paragraph that says, whereas the data clearly identifies that Wasaga Beach is lagging well behind in addressing the serious environmental concerns versus neighboring municipalities. It makes me uncomfortable with that. We maybe, we don't have that committee, like I had it here, I left my phone on to address it, but I won't. There were several steps, and so forming a committee doesn't address a serious environmental issue, it's a step towards it. Doing a baseline for greenhouse gas emissions, that is a step. It's the implementation that does it. So sometimes just creating a committee actually contributes to greenhouse gases by just having a lot of hot air spewed. But I realize that's part of the process. But when we say we're seriously lagging behind, just off the top of my head this morning, very early, I came up with things that have been done environmentally. So from the time I got on council 20 years ago, give or take, tree cutting bylaw, tree replacement policy, anti-idling bylaw, 1 park per year from 2003 to 2013, walk-friendly designation, bicycle-friendly community, communities in bloom, community garden, transit system, replacement of street lights to LEDs, that started in 2013, walkable Worsley, introduction of water consumption-based billing, healthy community network, grants for rain barrels, low-flow toilets, we even had them for shower heads at a period of time. We didn't go into spraying for the LDD moth. We haven't allowed a developer to build on the last green space that the town has at Beach Area 2 at this point. And as pointed out in the report earlier by our chief building officer that was forwarded to me, there have been a huge number of actions and items that we've done. So comparing us, based on those 5 criteria, yeah, we're not part of the PCP from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities and that. I agree, we need, I'm not disagreeing at all, we need that, but I just find it to sit there and say we have not been addressing some serious environmental concerns. I consider that really, you know, it's good for an election, but it's not really true. The other part here, I was writing all over. Again, I say as soon as possible, I agree. We don't need to put it off to the next council, but we have to remember that committees only have jurisdiction during the time we're here. Oh, yeah, and then, yeah, I think I already dealt with that. So those are my comments. So the final, because I'm going to be proposing an amendment here, the one is just that simple wording that be it resolved. That's a standard. Be it resolved that the Council of Wasaga Beach, and then it just modifies it a little bit. I can read it again if you want. And again, that paragraph, I'd like to see it removed or modified somewhat, whereas the data clearly identifies that, well, I don't really, I have concerns with that. And frankly, there was a bit of a letter writing campaign, and someone said, you know, prove you're an environmentalist by voting for it. And I will not be bullied to do that. I have 20 years on council where I've talked environment pretty well every day. So I will be doing what I think is best for the environment, and that is approving this committee. But I don't want to, you know, we've done a lot of stuff, and there's been lots of reports for 20 years addressing it. So if you're comfortable with at least the modification to the wording at the end and deleting that paragraph, I'll continue. Thank you.
Mayor Bifulci?
Thank you. My comments are being made now, as this is the first of two motions on today's agenda dealing with climate action. I will be supporting the second motion that will be coming forward following the one that we're discussing now. This first motion gives the impression that the town has been ignoring serious environmental concerns, which is not accurate. We are not lagging behind 2 years, as the Wasaga Beach Climate Action Team has been sharing throughout our community. This is confirmed in the staff report in this agenda. I will also say that for a group that claims to want to work with the town and has been given considerable attention by myself, council, and town staff, it is very disappointing to see the recent newsletter that they have been sharing. The newsletter lies and suggests that I am a climate change denier. This is misleading and irresponsible of this group to say that just because I don't 100% jump in their boat and agree with their demands. Interactions with a member of this committee has been aggressive, to say the least. There is clearly a lack of understanding by this first motion, as well as the local committee, on what is involved in setting up a town climate action team, assigning the appropriate staff, budget, and doing it right. The staff report in this agenda acknowledges that staff are gathering information which will form the foundation of a climate action framework for Wasaga Beach and put the next council in a position to make decisions regarding a terms of reference, determine the skills and knowledge required by committee members, and recommended budget allocation for initiatives. A terms of reference can be created and an advisory committee with knowledgeable people advising council and staff of potential beneficial initiatives can be formed. From there, climate policies based on sound science and realistic economics can be created. So I will not be supporting the motion before us at this time.
Thank you. Councillor Wells?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I too will not support the motion as is presented at this time. And before I get castigated by some very strong climate advocates, I am not a climate change denier. I fully understand that climate change is a reality and that it needs to be addressed. So having said that, though, I think we have to understand that before you establish an advisory committee, no matter what its purpose or why it's being established, you have to, first of all, establish a mandate. You have to establish the terms of reference for that committee. You have to establish the definition of the membership criteria and the membership size. For example, volunteers, representatives of outside agencies that may have input, and all of this does not happen overnight. This is staff have to work towards creating those parameters and those ideals, and then when a committee is established, then they can be reviewed, and if needed for adjustment, that can happen, but it doesn't happen overnight, as they said. The other thing that has to happen is you have to determine what other jurisdictions may have input or may have a position for where the climate action can take place or not take place. the mayor has already indicated the parameters, but, and I too have, take some offense to having been what I consider inundated with prescribed emails. They're just all identical, so it just means that somebody has sent one out and said, you know, send this to your local counselor. So we've got probably, I don't know, 10 or 12 that are all identical, so I don't take too much stock in those. The fact that, you know, somebody claims that we're 2 years behind, I disagree. On the parameters that they have chosen to use, which is 3 adjacent communities, yes, we may not have done the same things those communities have done, but we have done a lot of other things. And so there needs to be recognition for what has happened, not recognition for what someone else did and that we perhaps chose not to do or haven't done as yet. Furthermore, as has been indicated by, I believe, Councillor Foster, that all advisory committees dissolve at the end of the terms of council. They are a term of council appointments only, and at the end of each term, the new council determines, first of all, which advisory committees they wish to continue or not continue, and secondly, they then put out the call for volunteers or membership to be appointed to those committees. Based on the fact that climate initiatives are ongoing and that I don't believe that a 2 to 3 month hiatus is going to negatively impact our position, nor is it going to be a detriment to climate action overall. So therefore, I'm looking at it as saying we need to, I certainly support the concept of having a climate advisory body within our town, but I don't believe it needs to be established this moment and then be dissolved in 4 months or 3 months to have to be reinstated after that. I think it should be, the legwork can be done now in terms of creating some guidelines, some parameters, some terms of reference, some points of importance. That can all be done between now and the next council, and the staff can then make their recommendations to the next council, and the next council can ask staff for their input. We can further assess too at that point whether or not an existing advisory committees would be an appropriate addition to their mandate or a modification to their mandate. I think, for example, of the Healthy Communities Advisory Committee that we already have. To me, this fits well within what I would consider to be the mandate of a Healthy Communities Advisory Committee. And so I would propose that any consideration being given also look at the endorsement of the climate action being taken into that committee's mandate and its terms of reference. So I would certainly, approve, a recommendation of approval in principle for for climate action committee to be considered and then to be brought forward to the next council. Again, I would also suggest that membership in the PCM, which is the Partners for Climate Protection, which is a 5-step process for climate response, and it's monitored it's supported under the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, that perhaps as part of the looking at the potential for climate action response from our town, that we look at joining the Partners for Climate Protection. But again, that needs to come before the next council, and that needs to be part of the recommendations that would come from staff to the next council in terms of establishing advisory committees. I think that's mostly what I had to say, Deputy Mayor. I will leave it at that. I have some concerns about the newsletter that was sent out by the Climate Action Team. I think I'm not one that supports personal attacks which I see it, one of the comments in there, I personally saw as a personal attack. And I guess I'll just make my comment that I thought that was very inappropriate and not something that endears me to whoever it is that's choosing to print that kind of material. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wells. It sounded to me like a lot of the, your thoughts and your comments were captured in the second motion that's on our agenda today, but we're working with the first one, so I'm going to go back to Councillor Belanger and see if he would consider the amendments suggested by Councillor Foster.
I'm happy to read them for you, like.
I saw
Sorry.
Councillor Watson had his card up. I didn't know if you wanted.
Sorry, Councillor Watson, I saw you 3 times, wrote you down, and then I forgot about you. Go ahead, Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will not be supporting this motion as written either. A lot of comments that I was going to make have been said by Councillor Foster and Councillor Wells, but to start a motion with negativity and comparisons is a poorly written motion. This is not a contest with other municipalities. A scoring chart can be very subjective by the author that has been used to try and grade us. There are many categories of measurement, climate action initiatives, and this needs to be well thought out climate program going forward. So I'll be supporting either some amendments to this one or the second amendment is before council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. So with regards to the amendments, are you comfortable understanding the amendments that Councillor Foster was asking, Councillor Belanger, or would you like him to repeat them?
I would like the motion voted on as is. Thank you.
So, Councillor Foster, are you willing to withhold amendments to this one?
An amendment always comes before reading the motion. The amendment has to be moved or voted on
Seconded.
before it can be done as written. I believe that's correct, Madam Clerk.
Okay, so I will read the motion as amended if I got your notes right, or would you prefer to read it?
Madam Chair, if we could have a seconder to those amendments before we vote on amendments?
Okay, so is there a seconder for the amendment? So we've got Councillor Foster and...
In order to, I just want to make sure that they're clear what I'm amending, okay?
Yep,
So
go ahead.
if I can, so I'm fine with it. The first 1, 2, 3, the paragraph that starts out, whereas the data clearly identifies that Wasaga Beach is lacking well behind, I want that stricken completely. It would continue then basically as written till the one that says, then I motion, and I'm going to read the last part that I have. Be it resolved that the Council of Wasaga Beach establish a climate change advisory committee as soon as possible to assist staff and council in the development of a climate action plan. Further, that the Treasury staff add a budget item for this committee for consideration by the subsequent council. And that would be the end of my amendment right there. Thank you.
Councillor Belanger?
I will second that amendment.
Okay. Do we need to read the entire motion, or are we comfortable with the amendments read by Councillor Foster? Councillor Wells?
I'm sorry, Deputy Mayor, but I cannot even support the amendment as to that motion. I think it is still leading to an immediate establishment, and that's something that I am not prepared to support. And so therefore I will not support the amendment. And I am, somewhat, I guess, well, I'll leave it there. I'm just somewhat surprised that Councillor Foster has brought it forward when, and all of his comments to me reflected more of a more planned development of such a committee.
Councillor Foster?
I use the terms as soon as possible. That allows all the infrastructure to get in, and I only put a placeholder into the budget, heads up to the treasurer to placeholder in the budget. I'm not saying it could or couldn't be established this time. I'm saying as soon as possible.
Okay. Madam Clerk, would you like to read the motion from top to bottom before we vote on the amendment?
I can try.
Just so that we all know what we're voting on.
I might ask for Councillor Foster's help near the end, but I'll start off then. Whereas, sorry, let me just get to the top here. Whereas Wasaga Beach Council declared a climate emergency on May 13th, 2021, and whereas Wasaga Beach Climate Action Team had made a deputation to council, followed by a meeting with the mayor and key staff members, and whereas at said meeting, the Climate Action Team was asked to collect data from neighboring municipalities related to their actions in mitigating and adaptation of environmental concerns, including but not limited to the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, and whereas data has been collected and communicated to the mayor and council and designated town liaison. And whereas the next paragraph is stricken, and whereas all levels of government have placed a strong focus on addressing climate change concerns, with the federal level establishing the 5 milestones for municipalities and the provincial level setting out guidelines in Regulation 588-17, and Simcoe County have identified best practices for municipalities. Then I motion that is stricken and replaced with, be it resolved that a climate change advisory committee to council be established as soon as possible, and further that their top priority is to assist council and staff is, and further that is stricken, I believe.
Sorry,
And
would
if
you
you
like me
could
just to
read the
read that
rest.
last part?
Yes.
Okay. The then I motion has been stricken in, the whole end of it has been stricken. So it says, be it resolved that the Council of Wasaga Beach establish a climate change advisory committee as soon as possible to assist staff and council in the development of a climate action plan. Further, that Treasury staff add a budget item for this committee for consideration by the subsequent council.
Clear with everyone? All in favor, sorry, Councillor Wells, a question?
Again, I cannot support the motion because it does not allow for the potential to perhaps integrate a climate within an existing or within another one of the already advisory committees. And the example I used was the healthy community. This does not allow for that option, and I therefore won't support because it's too restrictive in terms of how it's going to be established.
Okay, I will call the vote. All in favor? So I see 2 opposed. And that would be 4. So that amendment fails, 4-2. So then we'll go back to the original motion.
Yes, Deputy Mayor, and you could just say the original motion as printed in the agenda.
Okay, thank you. So we will now be voting on the original motion as printed in the agenda. All in favor? Opposed, if any? And that motion fails 5-1. Thank you. The next item on our agenda is item 6.7.1, which is a notice of motion, Climate Change Committee request. And this one was brought forward by Mayor Byfolchi.
Thank you. I've already spoken or said what I had to say at the beginning of this discussion. I think the last paragraph in this motion, though, would accommodate some of the items that Councillor Wells has indicated that would allow staff to bring forward the concept of establishing a climate change advisory committee, and that would allow staff, when they're reviewing committees prior to the next council taking over, that they could incorporate that in. Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments? Councillor Foster?
A seconder, Madam Deputy Mayor?
Could I have a seconder for this motion, please? Councillor Wells? Councillor Foster, go ahead.
Thank you. Again, I'm going to have to support this on, and I do. I mean, my dedication to the climate is ongoing. But I honestly believe the modified other version was a better version of it, but given the choice between 0 and something, this is something. So grudgingly, I'll have to support that.
Thank you. Just checking, there's nothing from Councillor Watson. My thoughts were that I would have liked to see in the final paragraph more concrete actions. There's the concept of establishing the Climate Action Change Advisory Committee, and I would just like confirmation that that would include a mandate, the terms of reference, so that the next term of council can hit the ground running. I completely understand that there is no time. There's 75 days left of this term. It doesn't make sense to attempt to try to push through a committee because their first meeting would be in October, which would be also their last meeting. So fully support the terms of reference and the mandate, and I'm hoping that that general notice that says for the concept of establishing includes staff working on terms of reference. If you could speak to that.
That would certainly be my intent. I think staff have indicated in their staff report that they have been gathering information. They need that information in order to bring these types of things forward. Concept of establishing, it would be the terms of reference. It would be, is there opportunity to amalgamate committees that we have now? So I would leave that in staff's hands.
Thank you. So then seeing no more discussion, just keep checking my screen here for poor Councillor Watson. Sorry about that. I will read the motion moved by Councillor Byfolchi, seconded by Councillor Wells. Whereas Council declared a climate emergency action on May 13th, 2021, and whereas the Wasaga Beach Climate Action Team made a deputation to Council, followed by a meeting with the Mayor and key staff members requesting that the town adopt a climate action plan, and whereas Council requested staff to share information about the various actions the town is taking to mitigate the negative effects of climate action, and whereas town departments have reported to Council on their various initiatives to address the impacts of climate change, and whereas the Planning Department is incorporating climate change policies in the proposed new official plan, and whereas the town has established a climate action page on its website, and whereas a staff member has become a member of the Climate Change Exchange and been assigned the responsibility to research and bring forward recommendations for Council's consideration on the best approach to creating and implementing a climate action framework, and whereas some municipalities in Simcoe County have moved forward with a standalone plan and others have not or are reviewing their options, and whereas some municipalities have established climate change action advisory committees to advise Council on matters pertaining to climate change, and whereas the term of Council has almost ended, be it resolved that the Council of the Town of Wasaga Beach requests that staff bring forward the concept of establishing climate change advisory committee to the next Council for consideration. All in favor? Sorry, I'm counting. Sorry, opposed if any? So that motion carries 5-1. Thank you. So the next item on our agenda is item 6.7.3, which is a notice of motion from myself. If I could get a seconder for that. Thank you, Councillor Foster. Then I will read the motion. Whereas we continue to learn more about truth and reconciliation, I believe small steps such as a land acknowledgement at our meetings will bring a greater awareness to all and is a sign of respect and gratitude towards the Indigenous people, the original stewards of this land we live, work, and play on today. And whereas at our June 29th, 2021 council meeting, we agreed to learn more about the Indigenous history of our area and the challenges faced by the local Indigenous community, and whereas with the second National Truth and Reconciliation Day rapidly approaching, be it resolved that I would like to bring forward a motion to introduce a land acknowledgement to be read at all Wasaga Beach Council, Committee, and Advisory Committee meetings, and further that the Communications Department assist with appropriate wording to be introduced by September 2022. Thank you. Would you like to speak to this motion first?
I would.
Go ahead, Councillor Foster.
Sorry, and obviously I'm supportive of it, but my comments are exactly the same as the first motion. This is the council that's doing it. So be it resolved that the council of the town of Wasaga Beach introduce a land acknowledgement. I'd like to suggest a friendly amendment. It's not I, it's we. So that's my, and I'm happy to support that. Call it a friendly amendment.
First paragraph?
The very last. Be it resolved that the
we.
council of the town of Wasaga Beach introduce a land So get rid of, I would
Yep.
like to bring forward a motion. The council is doing an action, we're not bringing forward a motion, we're actually passing an action.
Right. Thank you. Mayor Byfolchi?
Thank you. There are many people and great causes that deserve to be recognized as part of history. However, I believe that council meetings, committee meetings, and advisory committee meetings are a place to deal with town business. If this motion was asking that council do something special in the month of June each year to recognize National Indigenous History Month, or if it was to ask that council include land acknowledgements on special occasions such as groundbreaking, or a plaque on the walls of Town Hall for all to read, I would support it wholeheartedly, as I believe it would have more meaning. In my opinion, just to add words at the beginning of each meeting makes it no longer special. People won't hear it after a while, and it becomes just another comment or question like asking who has a pecuniary interest. So for those reasons, I can't support the motion as written, but would be happy to support another way to recognize our Indigenous community. Thank you.
Councillor Belanger?
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor Bray. I will support the motion. I believe that we have, over the last number of months, seen how clear it is how Indigenous people and children have been mistreated in history. And I think that we need to have a constant reminder, certainly within the Wasaga Beach United Church, we start every service with acknowledgement, and I fully support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Watson, I'm just double checking here. You're good? Okay. So as the original introducer of the motion, I just wanted to say that I strongly believe we as Canadians we need to accept responsibility of the past and move forward in reconciliation, and I see this as a good first step for our town and for all to develop and to use a respectful land acknowledgement. So I will be calling the vote with the friendly amendment. I will read through from the top. So actually I read it already, but I didn't read it with the amendment. Should I? Sorry, Madam Clerk.
That's okay, Deputy Mayor Bray. I think council understands the motion. You don't need to read it again, but if they wish.
No, it affects paragraph 4, and just basically it will read, be it resolved that the Council of the Town of Wasaga Beach motion to introduce a land acknowledgement to be read at all Wasaga Beach Council Committee and Advisory Committee meetings.
I think,
Sorry? To introduce. Okay. Be it resolved that the Council of the Town of Wasaga Beach introduce a land acknowledgement. Clear? All in favor? Okay. Opposed, if any? So that motion passes 5-1. Thank you very much. So the next portion of our meeting will be moving into closed session. Resolved that pursuant to Section 239(2)A of the Municipal Act as amended, the next portion of the August 11th, 2022 Coordinated Committee meeting will move into closed session to discuss the security of the property of the municipality or local board. If I could have a mover and a seconder, please. Sorry, Councillor Wells, Councillor Belanger, all in favor? And that motion passes. Madam Clerk, if you could let us know when we are in closed session. Welcome back. Coordinated committee resumes after a brief in-camera session with a motion that council receive the report from the CAO, or I guess that committee receive the report from the CAO provided in closed session pertaining to municipal property negotiations for information, and that council confirm the direction provided to the CAO in closed session. If I could have a mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Foster, Mayor Bifulci, all in favor. Now, did Councillor Watson rejoin, or he left the meeting when we went into closed session? So I'll just make note that that would be opposed, if any. So then that would be 4-1. That motion carries. Thank you very much. And with that, this meeting is adjourned. Have a great day, everybody.